Southern small towns look peaceful from the outside. Slow streets, warm nights, familiar faces. But some towns carry history that never cooled down. And when everyone knows the same secret, silence becomes a survival instinct. This is Vesper Shroud, and these are 10 true horror stories from southern small towns, based on real events. Story 1. Town that went silent at noon. I never believed in curses until I drove through Millstone, Georgia, and realized some places are built on something much darker than soil and stone. It started with a job. I work as a state highway inspector, checking road conditions across the Deep South. Most days blur together in a haze of cracked asphalt and faded road signs. But that October afternoon, when I pulled off Highway 49 into Millstone, I entered a nightmare I still cannot escape. The town appeared normal at first glance. Population 873, according to the weathered sign. A main street lined with brick buildings from the 1930s. An old diner with dust-covered windows. A hardware store with a rusted Coca-Cola sign hanging crooked above the door. Everything felt frozen in time, suspended in amber like some forgotten museum exhibit of small-town America. But something felt wrong immediately. Deeply, disturbingly wrong. The few people I saw on the street moved with strange urgency, glancing repeatedly at their watches. A woman hurried past my truck, gripping her young daughter, whose hand so tightly the child winced. An elderly man stood motionless on a corner, staring at the clock tower in the town square. His expression held pure, primal terror. I checked my dashboard clock. 11:47 in the morning. I needed to inspect a bridge just outside town, so I continued down Main Street. The unsettling atmosphere followed me like a shadow. Every storefront looked haunted, not by ghosts, but by fear itself. Hand-painted signs in windows read, "Closed daily 11:50 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. Every single business displayed the same message. At 11:52, I noticed the streets had completely empty. Not a single person remained visible. Cars sat abandoned in the middle of the road, doors still open, engines running. A child's bicycle lay on its side in the street, front wheels still spinning. The silence began at 11:59. It did not arrive gradually. One moment, normal ambient sound filled the air, birds singing, wind rustling through oak trees, the distant hum of a generator. The next moment, nothing. Absolute, total, horrifying silence. But this was not mere quiet. This was the absence of sound itself. I sat in my truck, heart pounding, and realized I could not hear my own heartbeat. I snapped my fingers. "Nothing!" I shouted. My mouth moved, my throat vibrated, but zero sound emerged. I honked the horn. The motion happened, but existed in this eerie, impossible vacuum. The terror that gripped me then felt primal. Humans are not meant to experience such complete silence. Our brains reject it. Sound is how we know we exist in the world. Without it, reality itself begins to fracture. I stumbled out of my truck, needing to understand this disturbing phenomenon. The town square stretched before me, empty and unsettling in the midday sun. Every building stood with doors closed, curtains drawn. I approached the nearest window and peered inside the hardware store. A family huddled together in the corner. Parents wrapped their arms around 3 children, all with eyes squeezed shut, mouths moving in what must have been prayer. Their faces showed pure horror, the kind of fear that transcends rational thought. I moved down the street, checking other buildings. In every single one, I found the same chilling scene. People hiding, terrified, waiting for something. But what? The clock tower showed 12:03, 3 minutes into this nightmare silence. Then I saw movement at the far end of Main Street. A figure walking slowly, deliberately, down the center of the road. Even from a distance, something about its movements felt wrong. Too fluid, too purposeful. The way it moved reminded me of a predator stalking prey. I ducked behind a parked car, watching. As the figure drew closer, my mind struggled to process what I was seeing. It appeared human-shaped, but wrong in subtle, deeply unsettling ways. Its limbs bent at angles that defied anatomy. Its head turned a full 360 degrees as it scanned the empty street. And where its face should have been, only smooth, featureless darkness existed. This thing, this entity, moved with terrifying purpose. It would stop at each building, press its featureless face against windows, and seem to listen, or sense, or search for something. When it found buildings empty, it moved on, but when it detected hiding people, it would remain at the window, motionless, for long, horrifying minutes. I watched it approach the hardware store where I had seen the family. It pressed against the glass, its blank face somehow staring directly at the huddled group inside. The children, its mouths opened in what must have been screams, but the silence swallowed everything. The entity stayed there for what felt like an eternity. Then, slowly, deliberately, it raised one elongated arm and traced a pattern on the glass. A symbol I did not recognize, ancient and deeply wrong. The glass began to frost over where it touched, ice crystals spreading in unnatural patterns. Finally, after 5 full minutes, it moved on. The family inside remained frozen in terror. I realized with creeping dread that this thing was hunting, searching, and I was completely exposed, hiding behind a car in the middle of an empty street with nowhere to run. The clock tower showed 12:14. 14 minutes of this nightmare silence, 14 minutes of this creature, this methodical search through town. I needed to reach my truck, get out of Millstone before this entity found me. But between my hiding spot and my vehicle stretched 50 yards of open street. Moving would draw its attention immediately. The entity continued its slow, terrifying patrol. It checked every building, every window, every possible hiding place. Its movements held patient, inevitable certainty. It had all the time in the world. At 12:17, it turned and looked directly at my hiding spot. Even without eyes, I felt its gaze pierce through me. Ancient, malevolent, hungry. My body went rigid with instinctive fear, every muscle screaming to run while my brain understood that movement meant death. It began walking toward me, each step deliberate and measured. 30 yards away, 25, 20. My hand gripped my truck keys so tightly they cut into my palm. Blood dripped down my wrist, but I felt nothing except pure, existential terror. 15 yards, 10. The entity stopped directly in front of my hiding spot. It tilted its head, studying me the way a scientist studies an insect. Then it raised one impossibly long arm, reaching toward me. The clock tower bell rang out. 12:30 exactly. Sound returned to the world in an instant flood. Birds erupted in panicked flight. Car alarms blared. Dogs howled. And most terrifying of all, I heard my own ragged breathing, harsh and desperate. The entity vanished, not fading away, not walking off, simply ceased to exist between one moment and the next, as if it had never been there at all. Doors burst open across town. People stumbled into the street, some crying, others vomiting, all sharing the same haunted expression. They had endured this horror before, many times before. An old man approached me, his weathered face carved with deep lines of trauma. He introduced himself as Mayor Hutchins, and without my asking, he began explaining the curse that had claimed Millstone. 30 years ago, he told me, a traveling preacher arrived in town. He spoke of salvation and damnation, of ancient pacts and cosmic prices. Most folks ignored him, but one young man, desperate to save his dying daughter, listened. The preacher offered a deal. The town is silence for the child. This life. 1 hour each day where sound itself would be devoured, where an entity from somewhere beyond human understanding would walk their streets. The desperate father agreed. His daughter lived. The entity arrived the next day at noon. For 3 decades, Millstone had endured this daily nightmare. 30 minutes of absolute silence, 30 minutes of hunting, 30 minutes of praying the entity would not choose their building, their family, their life. The mayor, his voice dropped to a haunted whisper. The entity took someone occasionally, not often, maybe once or twice a year. They would simply vanish during the silence, never seen again. No bodies found, no trace left behind, just empty space where a person used to exist. He told me families had tried to leave, but anyone who abandoned Millstone would find the silence followed them. The entity would appear wherever they went, hunting only them, without the protection of being one among many. Those who fled lasted days, maybe weeks. Then they too would vanish. The town was trapped, bound by an ancient contract none of them had signed, paying the price for one desperate father, dischoiced 3 decades ago. I left Millstone that afternoon, driving faster than professional responsibility allowed. But as I crossed the town limits, I noticed something that turned my blood to ice. Carved into the welcome sign, barely visible beneath decades of weathering, was the same symbol the entity had traced on the hardware store window. That night, alone in my apartment 200 miles away, I researched everything I could find about Millstone. County records, news archives, census data. The population in 1994 had been 1,093. By 2024, it had dropped to 873. 220 people missing over 30 years. Never reported, never investigated, just erased from existence. I tried to tell people, filed reports with state officials, contacted newspapers, even reached out to federal investigators. Everyone listened politely, checked their files, and told me Millstone's population decline was normal for rural southern towns. Economic migration. Nothing unusual, nothing disturbing. But I know what I experienced in that cursed town. I know what stalks those streets every day at noon, hunting in complete, terrifying silence. 3 weeks after my visit, I received a letter postmarked from Millstone. Inside, a single piece of paper with the same ancient symbol drawn in what looked disturbingly like dried blood. Now, every day at 11:59, I hold my breath and wait. Wait to see if sound will vanish. Wait to see if I have been marked. Wait to discover if leaving Millstone was the biggest mistake I ever made. Because sometimes, in the quiet moments between heartbeats, I swear I feel something watching me. Something patient, something inevitable. And I know, with absolute certainty, that some places are not meant to be found by outsiders. Some towns harbor secrets that should remain buried. Some silences hide horrors beyond human comprehension. Millstone still exists, trapped in its daily nightmare. The people still hide. The entity still hunts. And somewhere in Georgia, off Highway 49, a town goes silent every day at noon. If you ever find yourself driving through the deep south and see a weathered sign reading, Millstone, population 873, do not stop. Do not investigate. Do not let curiosity override survival instinct. Just keep driving and pray you never hear the silence fall. Story 2. House with the open windows. I need to tell you about the house on Mercy Road before someone else dies there. Before you dismiss this as another creepy campfire tale, understand something. I saw what lives in those open windows. I felt it watching me. And now, every night when I close my eyes, I can still hear the sound it made. 3 months ago, I took a job as a property inspector in rural Georgia. The pay was decent, the work simple enough. Photograph abandoned homes, document structural damage, file reports. Easy money for a guy trying to rebuild after a divorce wiped out his savings. I had done maybe 40 houses without incident. Old farmhouses, collapsed barns, trailers reclaimed by kudzu. Nothing that kept me up at night. Then I got the assignment for 4487 Mercy Road. The moment I pulled onto that dirt driveway, something felt wrong. Not horror movie wrong, real wrong. The kind of disturbing unease your body registers before your brain catches up. The house was a 2-story Victorian-style structure, probably beautiful once, now sagging under decades of neglect. Gray paint peeled in long strips, the porch tilted at an angle that defied physics. Vines strangled the chimney, but what made my hands tighten on the steering wheel were the windows. Every single window in that house stood wide open, not just unlocked, not partially raised, fully open, gaping like dark mouths, despite the autumn chill and the rain clouds gathering overhead. I sat in my truck for 5 full minutes, engine running, telling myself to be professional. The locals had warned me about this place at the diner that morning. When I mentioned the address, the waitress actually stepped back from my table. An old man in a John Deere cap leaned over and said one sentence. "John, to look in the windows after dark." I laughed it off then. I was not laughing now. The wind picked up as I grabbed my camera and clipboard. Dead leaves swirled across the overgrown yard in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, almost intentional. The house loomed before me, and those open windows seemed to track my movement as I approached. Impossible, of course. Just my imagination playing tricks in the fading afternoon light. The front door hung partially open, standard for abandoned properties. I called out anyway, announcing myself as required by protocol. My voice sounded small and foolish in the heavy silence. No response, just the creaking of old wood and the whisper of wind through those open windows. I stepped inside. The smell hit me first. Not the expected mustiness of abandonment, but something else. Something organic and wrong. Like meat left too long in summer heat, but sweeter. Sickly sweet. The floorboards groaned under my weight. Wallpaper hung in rotted strips. Furniture remained, covered in dust thick as snow. A family had lived here once, had meals, celebrated birthdays. Then one day they left everything behind. I moved through the ground floor, photographing water damage and structural concerns, trying to ignore the prickling sensation at the back of my neck. The feeling of being observed. Through every room, those windows gaped open, I approached one in what had been the dining room, intending to check the frame for rot. That was when I noticed the scratches. Deep gouges in the windowsill, not from weather or age. These marks were deliberate, frantic, like something had clawed at the wood from inside the house, desperate to keep the window open, or desperate to prevent it from being closed. My hand started shaking as I photographed the damage. Professional detachment was slipping away, replaced by a primal anxiety I had not felt since childhood. Since those nights when you know something is wrong but cannot name it. When shadows move in ways they should not. When silence becomes a presence rather than an absence. The sun was setting. I needed to finish and leave. I climbed the stairs to the second floor, each step announcing my presence with a groan of protest. The upper hallway stretched before me, doors on either side standing open. And at the end of the hall, a window, wide open. Rain had begun to fall, but no water came through. The drops seemed to stop inches from the opening, as if blocked by something invisible. I photographed 3 bedrooms. All showed the same scratches around the windows. In what had been a child's room, I found something that made my blood turn cold. Crayon drawings still taped to the walls. Crude images made by young hands. But the content was horrifying. Every picture showed the same thing. Stick figures standing at windows, and outside those windows, something dark and shapeless watching them. Underneath one drawing, written in a child's unsteady hand. It comes when we close them. The light was dying fast now. My assignment required interior and exterior shots, but every instinct screamed at me to leave. To get in my truck and drive until Mercy Road was miles behind me. But I needed this job, needed the money. So I forced myself downstairs and out into the yard as darkness settled over the property like a burial shroud. The rain intensified. Within seconds I was soaked, but I kept working, circling the house with my camera. From outside, the open windows looked even more wrong. Black rectangles punched into the gray facade, and as I photographed the north side of the house, I realized something that stopped me dead in my tracks. I could see through the ground floor windows into the interior, but the upstairs windows showed nothing, just perfect darkness, despite the fact that it was the exact same failing light everywhere. As if something on the second floor was absorbing the light, consuming it. Thunder rolled across the Georgia hills. I raised my camera for one last shot of the upper windows. That was when I saw it. A shape, darker than the darkness inside, filling one of the upstairs windows. Not moving, just standing there, watching me. My rational mind tried to dismiss it. A shadow, a trick of the dying light in the rain. But my body knew better. Every hair on my arm stood straight. My heart hammered against my ribs. The thing in the window was real, and it was aware of me. I should have run. Instead, like an idiot, I zoomed in with my camera and took the shot. Through the viewfinder, I saw it clearly. The shape was roughly human in outline, but wrong in ways my brain refused to process. Too tall, too thin, with appendages that branched and twisted like winter trees. And where its face should have been, nothing. Just a void that seemed to pull at my vision, making my eyes water and my head ache. Then it moved. Not walking, not shifting position. It moved from one window to the next instantaneously, as if space meant nothing to it. Now it filled a different opening, still watching. Still waiting. I ran, dropped my clipboard in the mud and sprinted for my truck. Rain blinding me, terror giving my legs strength I did not know I possessed. I fumbled with my keys, dropped them, sobbing with fear as I searched the ground. Found them, got the door open, started the engine. As I threw the truck into reverse, I made the mistake of looking back at the house. Every window showed that shape now, the same impossible figure duplicated across every opening, all facing my direction. All perfectly still. And as my headlights swept across the facade, I swear I saw them shift, tilting forward slightly, as if preparing to pour out of those windows like water. I drove 40 miles before I stopped shaking enough to pull over. Sat in a gas station parking lot under fluorescent lights, surrounded by normal people doing normal things, trying to convince myself I had not seen what I knew I had seen. The photos would prove it was nothing, just shadows and rain and an overactive imagination fueled by small-town superstition. I pulled out my camera with trembling hands and reviewed the images. The interior shots looked normal. Decay and abandonment. Nothing supernatural. I scrolled through the exterior photos. The house at golden hour. The house in fading light. Then the final image. The one I took when I saw the shape in the window. My stomach dropped. The photo showed the house clearly. Rain-streaked. Darkening. And in every single window, that shape. That impossible branching figure. Crystal clear in the photograph. Undeniable. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was what I noticed when I zoomed in on the image. In the center window, the one where I had first seen it, scratched into the glass in letters visible even in the photo. Thank you. I deleted every image, filed a report claiming the property was too structurally unsound to safely inspect. Quit the job 2 days later. Tried to forget. But 3 weeks ago, I learned why that message appeared in my photo. The house burned down. Spontaneous combustion. The fire marshal called it. No explanation. The blaze was so intense that nothing remained but the foundation. Local news covered it as a curiosity. A dangerous eyesore finally removed. Then people started going missing. First, a teenage couple parked too close to the ruins, never came home. Then a homeless man who had been sheltering in the area. Then a deputy investigating the disappearances. 7 people in total, all vanished within a quarter mile of where the house had stood. I saw the news coverage, saw the search teams combing the woods, and I knew what had happened. By photographing that thing, by documenting it, I had given it proof of existence. Made it more real somehow. And when the house burned, when those windows finally closed forever, I had freed it. The thing that needed the windows open. The thing that could not exist in an enclosed space. The thing that had kept a family so terrified they abandoned everything and ran. I had let it out. Last night, I woke to find every window in my apartment open. I live on the 4th floor. I know I locked them before bed, but there they were, gaping wide, letting in the cold autumn air. And standing at the foot of my bed, darker than the darkness, was that shape. Those impossible branching appendages, that void where a face should be. It did not move, did not speak, just stood there, watching, waiting. When the sun finally rose, it was gone. The windows remained open. I am telling you this because I need you to understand. If you ever see a house where every window stands open, no matter the weather, no matter the season, do not investigate. Do not photograph it. Do not even look too closely. Some things are kept behind open windows for a reason. Some things need that passage between inside and outside to survive. And some things, once acknowledged, will never let you close your windows again. I have not slept in 3 days. I cannot close my eyes without seeing it. Cannot close my windows without hearing the scratching. The desperate clawing of something that needs them open. Something that is here with me now. Something that followed me home. Something that is standing behind me as I write this. Waiting for dark. Waiting for me to understand that there is no escape. No safety. No locked door or closed window that can keep it out. Because I invited it in. I made it real. The house on Mercy Road is gone. But what lived in those open windows is not. And tonight, it is hungry. Story 3. Road that flooded too fast. I should have listened to the gas station attendant. That is what haunts me now. 3 years later, sitting in my apartment with the lights always on, unable to sleep through the night. The way she grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging into my skin, and whispered that I absolutely should not take Route 47 through the valley. Not tonight, not when the weather was turning dark. But I was stubborn. I was driving home from my sister's wedding in Vermont. Tired, annoyed, and eager to cut 40 minutes off my drive through the back roads of western Massachusetts. The main highway was clogged with traffic. The weather forecast said clear skies. I thought the attendant was just being paranoid. One of those superstitious locals who believed every creepy legend passed down through generations. I was wrong. Terribly, impossibly wrong. The fear started before I even reached the road. As I pulled out of the gas station, heading toward Route 47, something shifted in my chest. Not anxiety, something primal. An instinct screaming that I should turn around. My hands trembled on the steering wheel. I noticed my breath becoming shallow. But I pushed through it, told myself it was just highway fatigue setting in. Nothing more than the lingering stress of the wedding and too much family drama. I was a rational person, 38 years old. I didn't believe in curses or warnings or the unsettling whispers of strangers in convenience stores. The first 10 miles were normal, boring, even. Dark forest on both sides of the road, the occasional house light flickering between the trees like a distant eye watching me pass. The radio played softly, some late-night talk show I barely heard. My shoulders began to relax. See, I thought, nothing to fear, just an old woman with an overactive imagination and a love for local folklore. Then I saw the sign. It was weathered, faded to a sickly gray, nailed to a wooden post at the mouth of a small valley. The letters were barely legible, carved by hand decades ago. Route 47, valley, local traffic only. Below it, Someone had spray painted a single word in red. Leave. My stomach tightened. I slowed the car, peering at the sign through my windshield. The spray paint looked fresh, maybe a few weeks old. 9 years. Someone had recently felt compelled to add that warning. The thought was disturbing. I considered turning back, finding an alternate route, but my GPS insisted this was the fastest way, and stubbornness, that dangerous human flaw, kept me moving forward. The road descended into the valley, and the air grew colder. I could feel it seeping through the vents, raising goosebumps on my arms. The forest closed in tighter, the trees so tall and thick that my headlights seemed to disappear into a wall of darkness rather than illuminate the path ahead. There were no other cars, no houses, nothing but the nightmare landscape of crooked branches and a road that twisted like a serpent. And then I smelled it. Water. Not rain. Not the fresh smell of a stream. This was stagnant, wrong, thick and rotten, like something had died in it. My windows were closed, but the smell invaded anyway, creeping through the air conditioning, coating my throat. I gagged. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. Every instinct told me to accelerate, to get through this valley as fast as possible, but something else whispered caution. Something told me that speed on this road would be a mistake. I maintained a steady 45 miles per hour. The first sign of the water was subtle, a slight dampness on the pavement, barely visible in my headlights. Then the dampness became wet. Wet became streaming, and within what felt like seconds, water was flowing across the road like I was driving through a river. But there was no rain. The sky above was clear, stars visible through breaks in the trees. The water was rising from below, from somewhere beneath the ground, pushing up through the asphalt with terrifying purpose. The creepy realization hit me hard. The attendant had warned me about this. The flooding. The water that rose faster than it should. My heart hammered against my ribs. I checked my phone for reception, but there were no bars. Of course there weren't. Nothing about this road was normal. The water was now up to the bottom of my door panel. My tires splashed through what looked like a shallow stream, but I could feel the current pushing against the vehicle, trying to sweep me sideways. The road was disappearing beneath the liquid darkness. I thought about turning around, going back the way I came, but I couldn't make out the road behind me anymore. The water had swallowed it completely. The only choice was forward, always forward. And the terrifying thing was that the road kept descending. The valley grew deeper. The water grew darker and deeper with each passing second. That's when I noticed something that made my blood freeze in my veins. The water wasn't moving like normal water. Streams flow downhill. They push in the direction of gravity. But this water seemed to be flowing upward, defying every law of physics I understood. The current was pulling me deeper into the valley, not towards some distant stream or river, but towards something below. Something that was drawing the water down like a drain. The terrifying thought paralyzed me. What if this wasn't flooding at all? What if the valley was sinking? I pressed the accelerator harder. My car lurched forward, pushing through water that now reached my windshield. I could barely see the road. The world outside had become nothing but darkness and that horrifying liquid that smelled of decay and something else. Something chemical, something unnatural. The fear was consuming me now, not the simple fear of a dangerous situation, but the deep, existential dread of something fundamentally wrong with the world itself. The kind of fear that makes you question reality. The kind of terror that rewires something in your brain permanently. My speedometer read 50 miles per hour. The water was still rising. My headlights flickered. Once, twice, and for a moment, I saw something in the darkness ahead that will haunt me until I die. A shape, massive, in the water, moving with disturbing intelligence toward my car. I screamed. The headlights came back on, and the shape was gone. Nothing but water and darkness and the shrieking sound of my tires fighting for traction on a road that was no longer there. I don't fully remember what happened next. My mind has blocked parts of it out. A mercy I don't deserve. I remember the steering wheel feeling heavy, impossible to turn. I remember the sensation of my car beginning to sink, the water rushing up to my windows, the chilling sound of it entering the vehicle. I remember pounding on the doors, realizing they wouldn't open against the pressure of the water outside. And then, impossibly, the car stopped sinking. I was suspended in the water, in that horrifying darkness, waiting to die. Waiting for my lungs to betray me and pull in that rotten liquid. But the seconds passed, and I didn't drown. The water didn't to rise further. I could breathe. My hands trembled as I touched the window, and I felt the most unsettling sensation of my life. The water was warm, exactly body temperature, as if the surrounding darkness was alive, as if I was inside something rather than drowning in water. The realization shattered something inside me. I began to hyperventilate, clawing at the door handle. My fingers found the manual window crank, and I began rolling down the window with mechanical desperation. The water rushed in immediately, flooding the cabin, filling my lungs with that chemical taste. I felt my body moving, pulled by something I couldn't see. I felt the car moving too, sinking further down, and then I felt nothing at all. I woke up on the road. Not in my car, not in the water, on the dry asphalt of Route 47, about 3 miles from where I entered the valley. My clothes were soaked. My lungs ached. My body was covered in marks that looked like fingerprints, but they were too large, too irregular, too deliberate. My car was found 2 days later, a quarter-mile upstream in an actual creek, empty of water. There was no explanation, no crash damage, no evidence of what had happened. The police officer who interviewed me suggested I hallucinated the entire experience, that I driven off the road in a moment of panic and somehow managed to escape. But the terrifying truth is different. I know what was in that water. I know because 3 months after that night, other things started appearing in my apartment. Wet spots on my bathroom floor that smelled of rot and chemicals, scratches on my windows from the inside, and sometimes, late at night, I hear it. That sound of water flowing upward, and underneath it, something that might be breathing. The most unsettling part is this. I learned there are others. People who took Route 47 at night and came back wrong. People who have wet dreams about drowning in something alive. People who wake up with those fingerprints on their bodies, slowly appearing more and more with each passing year. The attendant at the gas station quit her job 3 weeks after I passed through. Her replacement was a young man, new to the area. When I drove past 6 months later, just to understand what had happened, I stopped to ask him about the road. He gave me that same look she had given me, terrified, knowing, and then he grabbed my arm. His fingernails dug into my skin, drawing blood, as he whispered the same words to a new customer entering the store. Don, take Route 47. Not tonight. Not when the water is rising. Not when you can still turn back. Because the thing about that road is this. It just flood. It feeds. And every time someone drives through it, every time they feel that water rising, that current pulling them down into the darkness, a small part of them stays behind. A piece of their mind, their essence, their consciousness. I can feel them sometimes. All of us who have been taken and returned, we're still down there in that horrifying darkness, drowning in warm water that tastes like our own fear. We're waiting, and sometimes, on nights when the rain is heavy and the valley floods again, more of us join them. The scariest thing about horror isn't the unseen monsters or the supernatural terror. It's the realization that some places on this earth aren't meant for the living. Some roads lead somewhere else entirely, and some exits, once you take them, never quite lead back home. Story 4. Church that locked after dark. I never believed in evil until I heard those doors lock behind me. It happened 3 months ago in rural Georgia, just outside a town so small it didn't have a gas station. I was driving cross-country, taking back roads to avoid traffic, when my truck started overheating near sunset. Steam poured from under the hood as I coasted onto the shoulder, miles from anywhere, surrounded by pine trees that seemed to stretch forever into the growing darkness. My phone showed no signal. The highway behind me was empty. The fear started then, that creepy isolation you feel when you realize how alone you really are. I walked. The asphalt was still warm from the day, this heat, and the air smelled like pine needles and something else, something old and musty that made my skin crawl. After 20 minutes, I saw it through the trees. A white church, small and weathered, sitting in a clearing like it had been forgotten by time itself. No cars in the dirt parking lot, no lights in the windows, but the front door stood open, and in that moment, an open door felt like salvation. The church was old, maybe 100 years or more. White paint peeled from wooden walls, the steeple leaned slightly to one side, and the cross on top was black with age. As I got closer, I noticed something disturbing. Every window had bars on it. Not decorative ironwork, but thick steel bars like you see on a prison. What kind of church needs bars to keep people out? Or maybe The thought came unbidden, to keep something in. I called out. My voice echoed across the empty clearing, swallowed by the surrounding forest. No response. The open door seemed to beckon me forward, a dark rectangle against the white walls. I should have turned around. I should have kept walking down that highway. But the sun was setting fast, and the temperature was dropping, and I told myself I just needed to use their phone. Find someone who could help with my truck. I stepped inside. The interior was dim, lit only by the fading sunlight through those barred windows. Wooden pews lined both sides of a narrow aisle leading to a simple altar. The air inside was cold, unnaturally cold for a Georgia evening, and it carried that same musty smell, stronger now, mixed with something like sulfur or decay. Dust covered everything. The floorboards creaked under my feet, each sound sharp and unsettling in the silence. No decorations on the walls. No crosses, no religious imagery at all, which struck me as horrifying in its wrongness. What kind of church has no crosses? Then I heard it, a low scraping sound from somewhere behind the altar, like metal dragging across wood. My heart hammered against my ribs. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but I was frozen, listening. The sound stopped, started again, stopped. In the growing darkness, shadows seemed to move in the corners of my vision, and that eerie feeling of being watched crept over my skin like insects. I turned to leave. That was when the doors slammed shut. The sound was deafening in the small space, final as a coffin lid closing. I ran to them, grabbed the handles, pulled with everything I had. They wouldn't budge. Locked from the outside. Panic flooded through me, hot and terrifying. I pounded on the wood, shouting for help, but my voice just echoed back at me, mocking and hollow. Through the gap beneath the doors, I could see the last light of day disappearing. Darkness was coming. I tried the windows, all locked. The bars made them impossible to break. I was trapped in this creepy church that locked after dark, and nobody knew I was there. My phone still had no signal. The battery was at 15%. I turned on the flashlight, and the beam cut through the darkness, revealing details I hadn't noticed before. Scratches on the pews, deep gouges in the wood, like something with claws had torn at them. The altar had dark stains that looked disturbingly like old blood, and on the wall behind it, barely visible in the shadows, someone had carved words into the plaster. They come after dark. My blood turned to ice. The scraping sound started again, louder now, coming from beneath the floorboards. Something was under the church, something that moved. I backed away from the altar, my flashlight beam shaking, illuminating the scratched pews and empty aisles. The temperature kept dropping. I could see my breath now, white clouds in the beam of light. The smell of decay grew stronger, overwhelming, making me gag. Then I saw the door. A small door set into the floor near the back of the church, almost hidden in shadow. A cellar entrance. The scraping was coming from down there. Whatever was below me was trying to get up, and with each scrape, I heard something else. A sound like breathing, heavy and wet, accompanied by a low growl that made my primitive brain scream danger. I had to get out. I searched frantically for another exit, any way to escape this nightmare. My flashlight found a narrow door beside the altar, and I lunged for it, throwing it open. A stairway led up into darkness. The steeple. Maybe I could break through up there, signal for help somehow. I took the stairs two at a time, the old wood groaning under my weight. The steeple room was tiny, barely big enough to stand in. The bell hung motionless above me, covered in dust and cobwebs. But there was a window, a small circular window facing the road. No bars. I could break it, climb through, get onto the roof. I looked around for something to use. That's when I heard the cellar door open downstairs. The sound echoed up through the church. Old hinges shrieking, wood slamming against stone. Then footsteps, multiple footsteps, shuffling and uneven, moving across the floor below. Not human footsteps, something else, something that dragged and scraped as it walked. The breathing grew louder, accompanied now by a wet clicking sound that made me think of insects or something worse, something that shouldn't exist. I grabbed the bell, this clapper, a heavy iron rod, and smashed it against the window. The glass shattered outward, and cold night air rushed in. I could see the forest, the empty parking lot, the dark road beyond. Freedom, but the steeple window was 20 feet above the ground, and below it was nothing but hard-packed dirt. The footsteps reached the stairs, I looked down through the opening in the floor and saw them. 3 figures climbing toward me in the darkness. But they weren't 2 people. They were shaped wrong, twisted, moving on all fours like animals but with elongated limbs that bent at impossible angles. Their skin was pale, almost luminescent in the shadows, stretched tight over skeletal frames. And their faces, oh God, their faces were human once. Maybe, but corrupted, distorted into something nightmarish. Empty black eyes, mouths that opened too wide, revealing rows of teeth that looked sharp and hungry. I didn't think. I climbed through the window. The fall felt like forever, the cold air rushing past me, the ground rushing up. I hit hard, my ankle twisting, pain shooting up my leg like fire. But adrenaline is a terrifying and powerful thing. I ran, limping, stumbling, falling and getting back up. I ran toward the road. Behind me, I heard the window frame splinter as something followed, crashing through, landing with a wet thud on the ground. They were chasing me. I could hear them behind me in the darkness, their clicking breath, the scrape of claws on dirt, getting closer. The fear was overwhelming, primal, the kind of horror that strips away everything civilized and leaves only the desperate animal need to survive. My lungs burned. My ankle screamed with every step. The road seemed impossibly far away. Then I saw headlights. A truck was coming down the highway, heading toward me. I ran into the middle of the road, waving my arms, shouting. The truck's brakes squealed. It stopped. An old man leaned out, his face confused and concerned. But that concern turned to horror as he looked past me at whatever was emerging from the darkness behind me. "Get in!" he screamed. I didn't look back. I threw myself into the passenger seat, and he gunned the engine before I even had the door closed. We roared away into the night, leaving that cursed church behind. I finally looked back through the rear window. They stood at the edge of the road, 3 pale figures in the darkness, watching us leave with those empty black eyes. Then they turned and walked back toward the church, disappearing into the shadows. The old man didn't speak for 5 miles. Neither did I. Finally, he broke the silence. "You went in the church," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, still shaking, still feeling that creepy terror crawling under my skin. "We don't go near that place after sunset," he continued, his voice tight. "Been that way for decades. Doors lock at dark. Always have. Something lives under that church. Something old and evil that the people who built it tried to contain. They put bars on the windows. They made the doors lock from the outside when the sun goes down, to keep whatever is down there from getting out, and to keep people like you from wandering in and disturbing it." "What are they?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't answer for a long time. When he did, his words made my blood run cold. "We don't. You know, nobody who's seen them up close has ever been able to tell the story. You were the first person to get out of that church after dark in 30 years. The last one we found, well, we found pieces. He drove me to the next town, to a motel where I could stay the night. Before he left, he gave me one final piece of horrifying advice. Forget that place exists. Don, to tell this story. Don, to go back. And whatever you do, if you ever see another church with bars on the windows that is empty at sunset, keep driving." I took his advice about the driving, but I couldn't forget. And I couldn't stop thinking about those words carved behind the altar. They come after dark. Who carved them? How many others had been trapped there? What happened to the people who didn't escape? 3 months later, I still have nightmares. I still see those empty black eyes staring at me from the darkness. I still hear that wet clicking sound, that dragging scrape of something that shouldn't exist moving in the shadows. And sometimes, late at night when I'm alone, I wonder if they were still there, waiting under that church, locked in during the day but free to roam those pews and aisles when the sun goes down and the doors lock shut. I wonder if they remember me, if they were waiting for me to come back. But mostly, I wonder about all those other small churches that passed on empty roads, the ones with bars on their windows, the ones that sit alone in clearings surrounded by forest. How many of them lock their doors at sunset? How many of them hide something in the darkness below? And how many unsuspecting travelers, broken down and desperate, have walked through those open doors at dusk, only to hear them slam shut behind them as the last light fades from the sky? I don't take back roads anymore. I stick to highways, to populated areas, to places where the lights never go out and you were never truly alone. Because I learned something terrifying in that church. Something that haunts me every time darkness falls. Evil is real. It's old. And sometimes, in forgotten corners of this country, it is barely contained. And all it takes is one unlocked door, one moment of bad luck, one sunset in the wrong place, to come face to face with horrors that were never meant to see the light of day. The church is still there. The doors still lock at dark. And whatever lives beneath it is still waiting, patient and hungry, for the next person who needs help badly enough to ignore every warning sign and step inside. Don't be that person. Don't ever be that person. Story 5. Porch light that never turned off. The scariest thing I ever saw was not a monster or a ghost. It was a single yellow porch light that refused to die, glowing every night in front of a house that had been empty for 17 years. I moved to Ashford, Montana last spring to escape my past. Divorce, bankruptcy, the kind of personal nightmare that drives a man to start over in a town where nobody knows his name. Population 3,000, surrounded by endless pine forests and mountains that swallow the horizon. The kind of place where people still wave at strangers and leave their doors unlocked. Except for one house on Maple Street. The Garrison place sat at the end of a dead-end road, separated from the nearest neighbor by a quarter-mile of overgrown lots. A two-story Victorian with peeling gray paint and broken shutters hanging at crooked angles. The front yard had surrendered to weeds years ago. Windows stared out like hollow eyes, some cracked, others completely shattered. But every single night, without fail, the porch light burned bright yellow against the darkness. I first noticed it during my second week in town. I had taken a job doing overnight security at the lumber mill on the edge of Ashford, which meant driving home through empty streets at 3 in the morning. That particular route took me past Maple Street, and I could not help but see that eerie, unsettling glow cutting through the shadows. At first, I assumed someone still lived there despite the house looking abandoned. Maybe an elderly person who never went outside. Maybe someone who valued privacy above all else. But something about that light felt deeply wrong. It burned too steadily, too brightly, like it was powered by something more than electricity. I asked about it at the local diner. The moment I mentioned the Garrison place, conversations died. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. The waitress, a woman named Carol with kind eyes and gray hair, simply shook her head and walked away. The only response I got came from an old-timer nursing black coffee at the counter. He looked at me with an expression caught between pity and warning, then muttered that some lights are better left burning. That cryptic answer only made my curiosity worse. Over the following weeks, I found myself driving past that house more frequently, studying it, trying to understand the disturbing mystery it represented. The light never flickered, never dimmed, never changed. Just that constant, chilling yellow glow illuminating the rotting porch and casting long shadows across the overgrown lawn. I learned from county records that the house had belonged to the Garrison family. Marcus and Linda Garrison, along with their 2 daughters, Emily and Sarah. They had lived there for 12 years before vanishing in 2007. Not moved away, vanished. One October morning, neighbors noticed the family car still in the driveway, the front door standing wide open, and absolutely no sign of the 4 people who had lived there. Police investigated, found no evidence of foul play. No blood, no signs of struggle. Personal belongings remained untouched. Food still sat in the refrigerator. The television in the living room had been left on, playing static. Everything suggested the family had simply ceased to exist mid-routine, erased from reality like characters deleted from a story. The house had sat empty ever since. The bank owned it technically, but nobody would buy it. Nobody would even enter it. And that porch light kept burning, night after night, year after year, powered by something the electric company could not explain. I started having nightmares about that light, dreams where I walked up the creaking porch steps, reached for the bulb, and felt something cold and hungry waiting just behind the door. I would wake up in my cheap apartment, heart racing, sheets soaked with sweat, and know with horrible certainty that the light was still burning out there in the darkness. My obsession grew worse. I began researching everything about the Garrison family, reading old newspaper articles, digging through archives, piecing together fragments of their lives. Marcus had worked as an accountant. Linda taught elementary school. The daughters were 7 and 9 when they disappeared. A normal, boring, completely unremarkable family. except for one detail buried in a police report I found in the county archives. 3 weeks before the family vanished, Marcus Garrison had called the police claiming something was watching them from the woods behind their property. He described hearing scratching sounds on the windows at night, seeing shadows moving past the porch light that did not match any human shape. His wife had started sleepwalking, he said, standing in the front yard staring at the forest for hours. The police found nothing, chalked it up to stress and overactive imagination. 2 weeks later, the Garrisons were gone. I knew I needed to see inside that house. The compulsion became overwhelming, drowning out common sense and self-preservation. Something in that building held answers. Something in that disturbing, eerie silence explained why the light never stopped burning. On a moonless Friday night in July, I finally worked up the courage to approach the Garrison place. I parked 3 blocks away and walked through the shadows, carrying only a flashlight and a crowbar. The summer air felt thick and wrong, like the atmosphere before a violent storm. The porch light grew brighter as I approached, its yellow glow seeming to pulse with alien rhythm. Up close, I could see the bulb itself looked ancient, the glass yellowed and cracked, yet somehow burning brighter than any modern LED. Moths should have swarmed around it. Instead, insects avoided it completely, creating a perfect circle of empty air around that horrifying light. The front door stood slightly ajar, not open, not closed, but caught in that unsettling middle ground. I pushed it with the crowbar, and it swung inward with a long, creaking groan that echoed through the empty house. The smell hit me immediately. Not decay or rot, but something worse. Something chemical and wrong, like burnt plastic mixed with copper. The air inside felt thick, almost liquid, and my flashlight beam seemed to bend and distort as it cut through the darkness. Everything remained exactly as the family had left it 17 years ago. A jacket hung on a coat rack by the door, shoes lined up neatly underneath. In the living room, furniture sat arranged for a family movie night that never happened. A bowl of popcorn on the coffee table had turned to dust, but its shape remained perfectly preserved. Photographs covered the walls, the Garrison family smiling at birthday parties, holidays, school events. Normal life captured in normal moments. But as I studied the pictures more closely, I noticed something deeply disturbing. In every single photo, without exception, shadows fell wrong. They stretched in directions that defied the light source. They pooled in corners where no darkness should exist. And in several pictures, barely visible, something else appeared in the background. A shape, a presence, something that did not belong. I climbed the stairs to the second floor, each step groaning under my weight. The sound echoed through the house in ways that felt unnatural, like the building itself was breathing. 3 bedrooms and a bathroom, all frozen in time, all empty, all terrifying in their normalcy. The master bedroom felt wrong immediately, colder than the rest of the house, the air thick with that chemical smell. And on the wall facing the bed, someone had carved symbols into the wallpaper. Not scratched, carved, deep gouges in intricate patterns that hurt to look at directly. Ancient, purposeful, deeply unsettling. I found the journal in the nightstand drawer. Linda Garrison, this diary. The last entry dated October 14th, 2007. The day before the family vanished. Her handwriting started neat but deteriorated across the pages into barely legible scrawl. She wrote about the thing in the woods, how it had been watching them for weeks, how it came closer each night, how Marcus insisted they keep the porch light on because darkness made it stronger, how the light seemed to hold it at bay, creating a barrier it could not cross. But the light demanded something in return. Every night it burned, it grew hungrier. Linda wrote about hearing whispers in the walls, about finding strange symbols carved into their daughter's bedroom door, about waking up to discover the entire family standing in the front yard, none of them remembering how they got there. The final entry sent ice through my veins. Linda wrote that the light had made an offer, safety in exchange for permanence, a barrier against the thing in the woods, but only if they agreed to feed it, to become part of it, to let the light consume them so it could keep burning forever. She wrote that Marcus had agreed, that they would do anything to protect their daughters from what waited in the darkness. The last line simply read, "Tonight, we become the light." I dropped the journal and ran, bolted down the stairs, through the living room, toward the front door. But as I reached the threshold, the porch light flared with blinding intensity. The yellow glow became white hot, searing, and in that terrible illumination, I saw them. The Garrison family, not ghosts, not bodies, something worse, They existed inside the light itself, their forms stretched and distorted, faces locked in expressions of eternal horror and impossible peace. Marcus, Linda, Emily, Sarah, trapped in the glow, feeding it, becoming it, forever keeping the darkness at bay. And I understood with soul-crushing clarity that they were not alone. Other shapes moved in that light. Other families. Other sacrifices stretching back decades, maybe centuries. All of them trapped. All of them burning. All of them protecting the living from something much, much worse that waited in the shadows. The thing in the woods showed itself for just a moment. A shape of pure darkness pressed against the edge of the light. This glow, massive and writhing and hungry beyond comprehension. Ancient, patient, waiting for the light to finally die so it could consume everything. I staggered backward, away from the house, away from that horrifying light. My mind refused to process what I had witnessed. My body operated on pure instinct, carrying me through the night toward safety. I left Ashford the next morning, packed everything I owned into my truck and drove without stopping for 12 hours. Put as much distance between myself and that cursed town as possible. But sometimes, in the darkest part of night, I wake up and see yellow light bleeding under my door. I hear whispers in the walls. I feel that chemical smell in the air. And I know, with terrible certainty, that the light is still burning in Ashford, Montana. Still protecting. Still consuming. Still trapping souls in eternal sacrifice. The scariest part is not what I saw in that house. It is knowing that the Garrison family made a choice. They chose that fate. They chose to burn forever because what waited in the darkness was so much worse. Sometimes I wonder how many other towns have lights that never turn off. How many other families made the same terrible bargain? How many people walk past glowing windows every night, never knowing what burns inside? If you ever see a light that should not be on, in a house that should be dark, do not investigate. Do not question. Do not try to understand. Some lights protect us from horrors we cannot imagine, and the price of that protection is more terrifying than the darkness itself. Story 6. Woods behind the trailer park. The screaming started at exactly 9:17 every night, and by the third week, nobody in Pinewood Mobile Estates called the police anymore. We had learned that whatever made that sound was not something the law could handle. I need you to understand something before I tell you what happened in those woods. This is not some creepy campfire story. This is a warning, because what I found behind that trailer park is still there, waiting in the darkness for the next person stupid enough to go looking. My name is Mike. I am 42 years old. I drive a delivery truck for a living. Nothing special about me. Just a regular guy trying to get by after my marriage fell apart and my bank account followed. 6 months ago, I moved into Pinewood, a rundown trailer park outside Valdosta, Georgia. Cheap rent, quiet neighbors, woods on 3 sides. Seemed perfect for a fresh start. The first night I heard the screaming, I was unpacking boxes in my kitchen. The sound cut through the humid summer air like a blade. High-pitched, agonized, undeniably human. It came from deep in those dark woods behind the park, echoing between the pines in a way that made my hands freeze on the box I was holding. The sound lasted maybe 30 seconds, then stopped as abruptly as it began. I stepped outside, expecting to see other residents rushing toward the tree line. Ready to help, ready to call for emergency services, but the dozen or so trailers around mine stayed dark and silent. Nobody came out. Nobody reacted, like they had not heard that horrifying scream at all, or like they had heard it before and learned not to respond. The next morning I asked my neighbor Carl about it. He was 60-something, lived in the trailer park for 15 years. Spent most days sitting on his porch drinking cheap beer. When I mentioned the screaming, his face went blank. He took a long pull from his can, stared at the woods, and said just 4 words that sent chills down my spine. Sounds travel wrong there. That was it. He went back inside and would not answer when I knocked again. I asked 3 other neighbors throughout the day. Got similar responses. Vague, uncomfortable. Nobody would explain what that meant. Nobody would talk about the woods. But that night at 9:17, the screaming came again. And this time I was ready. I stood on my porch, phone in hand, recording. The sound was exactly the same as before. Same duration, same pitch, same bone-deep terror in that voice. I played back the recording immediately. Nothing, just crickets and the distant hum of the highway. The screaming had not registered at all. I am not a superstitious person. I believe in logic, in explanations. But standing there in the darkness, staring at those silent woods while the memory of that scream still echoed in my ears, I felt something I had not experienced since childhood. Real fear, The kind that lives in your gut and whispers that something is very wrong with the world. The screaming continued every night. Same time, never varied by more than a minute. I started timing it, documenting it, trying to find a pattern or explanation. Some nights it sounded closer, some nights more distant, but it was always there, always terrifying, always ignored by everyone else in the park. Then came the morning I found the shoe. I had started jogging to clear my head, trying to outrun the stress and the eerie feeling that had settled over my life. My route took me along the edge of the woods, following the dirt path that separated the trailer park from the tree line. That was where I nearly tripped over it. A woman's running shoe. Nike, size 7. Fresh mud still caked on the sole, and it was pointing into the woods, like someone had been standing at the edge, then walked straight into that dense wall of pines and shadows and never came back out. I picked up the shoe with a stick, not wanting to touch it directly. My delivery driver instincts were screaming. Something terrible had happened here. I looked into the woods, trying to see past the first few rows of trees. The morning sunlight barely penetrated that canopy. Everything beyond 20 feet dissolved into an unsettling gloom that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. That was when I noticed the silence. No birds, no insects, no wind rustling the leaves. Just an oppressive quiet that felt wrong, unnatural, like the woods themselves were holding their breath. I reported the shoe to the police. They took a statement, said they would look into it, but their eyes held the same uncomfortable knowledge I had seen in my neighbors. They knew something about these woods, something they would not share with an outsider. 3 days later, the shoe was gone from the evidence bag at the station. The report I filed had vanished from their system, and when I called to follow up, the deputy I spoke with claimed no record of my visit existed. Like I had imagined the whole thing, but I had not imagined the shoe, had not imagined the screaming, and I definitely had not imagined what happened next. I started researching small-town newspapers, local history, online forums, anything about Pinewood mobile estates in those woods. What I found made my blood run cold. The trailer park had been built in 1978 on land that used to be farmland. Before that, it was wilderness. But in the 1920s, something happened in those woods, something the old-timers called the Echo Night. Details were sparse and conflicting, but the core story remained consistent. A revival meeting held deep in the forest. 30 people went in for a midnight service. Only 3 came out. They never spoke about what happened, never explained where the others went. They just repeated the same disturbing phrase over and over. The woods took them back. The 3 survivors spent the rest of their lives in psychiatric facilities. And according to one newspaper clipping from 1967, one of them claimed that the missing people were still in the woods, still screaming, still trapped in the moment of their terror. I should have moved out right then, packed my belongings and found somewhere else to live. But poverty makes you brave in stupid ways. I could not afford first and last month rent anywhere else, could not break my lease. So I stayed, and I started paying closer attention to those woods. The sounds really did travel wrong there. I tested it during daylight, stood at the tree line and had Carl yell from his porch 30 yards away. I could barely hear him, but when I stepped just 5 feet into the woods, his voice came through crystal clear. Too clear, like he was standing right next to me. And underneath his voice, I heard something else. Whispers. Dozens of overlapping whispers in the shadows between the trees. I stumbled backward out of the woods, my heart racing. Carl was staring at me from his porch, beer can frozen halfway to his lips. He shook his head slowly. A warning. I had crossed a line, had gotten too close to something I should have left alone. That night the screaming sounded different. Still at 9:17. Still horrifying, but now I could make out words. Faint, distorted, but definitely words. Help me, please. I am still here. I could not take it anymore. I had to know, had to understand what was happening in those cursed woods. So the next day, I did the one thing every smart person knows you should never do. I went into the woods alone. The temperature dropped 20 degrees the moment I passed the tree line. My breath came out in visible puffs despite the summer heat I had just left behind. The silence pressed against my eardrums like water pressure. And the light, God, the light was all wrong. It came from nowhere and everywhere at once, turning everything into flat shapes without depth or shadow. I walked slowly, phone in one hand, flashlight in the other. Neither worked properly. My phone showed no signal and the time kept changing. 7:30, then 3:15, then midnight. The flashlight beam bent at odd angles, illuminating things that should have been behind me. After what felt like hours but might have been minutes, I found the clearing. Perfectly circular, maybe 50 feet across. The ground was bare dirt, packed hard as concrete. And scattered across that circle were objects. Dozens of them, hundreds. Shoes, watches, wallets, car keys, all arranged in concentric rings, like some disturbing art installation. In the center of the clearing stood a tree unlike any I had ever seen. Its bark was smooth and pale as bone. Its branches twisted upward in geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. And carved into that trunk, covering every inch of visible surface, were names. Thousands of names, some fresh, some worn almost smooth by time. I recognized one immediately. Sarah Mitchell, the woman whose missing persons flyer had been taped to the gas station window for 3 months. I found her name carved into that tree at eye level, the letters still sharp and clear. That was when I heard the breathing. Not wind, not animals, breathing, human breathing, coming from everywhere at once. Slow, rhythmic, like the woods themselves had lungs. I ran, did not care about direction, just crashed through the underbrush, branches tearing at my clothes and skin, that terrible breathing following me. Getting louder, getting closer, I could feel hot breath on the back of my neck, could hear whispers forming words I could not quite understand. Then I burst out of the tree line, stumbled into the afternoon sunlight, fell to my knees in the gravel parking area behind the trailer park. When I looked back, the woods were silent and still, innocent, like nothing had happened. But my watch showed 9:17 p.m. Impossible. I had entered the woods at noon. But somehow, 9 hours had vanished, and I had only been in there for what felt like 20 minutes. That night, the screaming came as always, but now I understood. Now I knew what I was hearing. Those were not random screams. They were the voices of everyone who had ever gone too deep into those woods. Everyone who had found that clearing, that bone-white tree. They were trapped in there, caught in some loop of time and space where 9:17 p.m. lasted forever. Where their terror echoed endlessly through dimensions I could not comprehend. I left Pinewood Mobile Estates the next morning. Broke my lease. Took the financial hit. I did not care. I drive trucks up and down Interstate 75 now, and sometimes late at night I pass the Valdosta exit. I never take it, never even look in that direction. But here's the thing that keeps me awake. The thing that makes me check my locks 3 times before bed. When I left that morning, I saw Carl on his porch. He raised his beer can in a mock salute, and carved into his forearm, visible in the morning light, were names. Dozens of names, the same names I had seen on that tree. The people in Pinewood were not avoiding the woods. They were protecting them, keeping people away, because something in those trees needed to feed, needed new names to carve into that pale trunk. And the residents had made a deal. Stay quiet, keep people from investigating, ignore the screaming. In exchange, the woods would not come for them. I see it now when I close my eyes. That clearing, that tree, my name waiting to be carved. Because I broke the rules. I went looking, I found the truth, and the woods do not forget. Last week my GPS malfunctioned during a delivery run. Took me down back roads I did not recognize. And I swear, as I passed through a dense stretch of forest, I saw it. That bone-white tree, standing impossible beside a Tennessee highway. Hundreds of miles from where it should have been, the woods are spreading, finding new places to root, new people to trap. And every night at exactly 9:17, somewhere in America, someone hears screaming that nobody else can hear. Screaming from people who made the mistake of looking too close, of going too deep, of finding out that some sounds travel wrong for a reason. If you live near woods that feel too quiet, where light falls strange, where your neighbors warn you not to go walking after dark, believe them. Because what happened at Pinewood is not unique. It is just one place where the barrier between our world and something else has worn thin. One place where the trees remember things that should be forgotten. I will never go back. But sometimes, late at night when the world is quiet, I hear it. That breathing, getting closer. Story 7. Town siren that wasn't. Deeper weather. I heard it for the first time on a Tuesday night in March. And something inside me immediately knew it meant death. That sounds insane. I realize I am a rational man. I work in insurance adjusting. I deal with facts, numbers, probabilities. I don't believe in premonitions or gut feelings that defy explanation. But the moment that siren began its low, pulsing wail across the small Nebraska town, I just moved to. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to run. Not walk, not calmly gather my things. Run. I was sitting in my apartment above the hardware store on Main Street, eating takeout Chinese food from the only restaurant in town, when the noise started. It wasn't sudden. It rose slowly from somewhere to the east, a sound that seemed to come from the earth itself rather than any mechanical source. The pitch was wrong. A standard emergency siren rises and falls with urgency, a rhythm designed to cut through background noise and alert people quickly. This was different. This was methodical, deliberate. A low, moaning wail that seemed to say something in a language older than words. I stood up, my food forgotten, my hands shaking. My apartment was on the second floor of a building constructed in 1963. The windows rattled with each pulse of the siren. Not the rattling of normal sound waves against glass, but a deep vibration that seemed to resonate with something fundamental inside my body. My teeth ached, my vision blurred slightly, and beneath all of it was that creeping sense of dread, that terrifying knowledge that something catastrophic was happening. I went to the window and looked down at Main Street. The town was shutting down in real time. Lights were turning off. Storefronts that had been open were suddenly dark. A woman I'd seen at the grocery store stood frozen on the sidewalk, staring upward at nothing, tears streaming down her face. An elderly man was moving through the street, not running, but walking with the deliberate speed of someone who knew exactly where to go and what to do. The siren continued its haunting wail, unbroken, unrelenting, impossible to ignore. I grabbed my phone to call someone, anyone, for an explanation. But there were no emergency alerts on my screen. No news notifications, no messages. The town's Facebook group, which I'd been added to, showed nothing. The last post was from that morning. Someone asking about the best time to plant tomatoes in the Nebraska soil. Then, as suddenly as it started, the siren stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the noise. It was thick and suffocating, pressing against my eardrums like the bottom of the ocean. I stood at the window, waiting for my racing heart to slow, waiting for some explanation, waiting for anything that made sense. An hour passed, 2 hours. The streets remained empty. No cars, no people. Just the wind moving through the trees and the occasional sound of a door closing somewhere in the building. The fear I felt wasn't diminishing. It was growing, mutating into something more complex. Not fear of what the siren meant, but fear that I would never know what it meant. At 11 p.m., I decided to go downstairs and knock on the door of Bill Hutchins, the man who owned the hardware store. Bill was in his 60s, had lived in this town his entire life, and had been friendly enough when I rented the apartment. He would know what the siren was. He would have answers. His store was dark. His apartment door in the back was locked. I knocked anyway, hard enough that my knuckles hurt. There was no response. The building felt abandoned, as if Bill had simply vanished into the night, leaving behind only the faint smell of old wood and metal polish. I returned to my apartment and tried to sleep. I didn't manage more than a few minutes of restless unconsciousness before waking, my heart pounding from dreams I couldn't quite remember. They felt important. They felt like warnings. The next morning, I ventured into town. The sun was shining, the air was mild, and everything appeared normal. Cars moved slowly down Main Street. The diner was open. The coffee shop had its usual line. But something fundamental had changed. People moved differently. They didn't make eye contact. When they passed each other on the sidewalk, there were no waves, no hellos, no acknowledgement. It was as if a switch had been flipped in everyone's mind, converting them from friendly Midwestern residents into something distant and hollow. I stopped at the diner and ordered coffee from a waitress named Sarah, who I'd seen there my first week in town. I asked her about the siren. She stared at her order pad for a long moment, then walked away without responding. When she returned with my coffee, she set the cup down hard, nearly spilling it, and whispered a single sentence that chilled me to my core. "You done? Do you ask about the siren?" The creepy reality of her response hit me like a punch to the stomach. This wasn't just some emergency alert that the town had already forgotten about. This was something else. Something unsettling that had roots so deep in this community that even mentioning it was considered dangerous. Over the next 3 days, I tried to find information. I searched the town's website, the local library archives, even old newspapers stored in the basement of City Hall. Nothing. No explanation. No mention of what the siren was or why it existed. But I did find one interesting detail in the town records. The siren had been installed in 1952, almost 7 decades ago, and there was no documentation about what it was supposed to warn about. The specifications, the purpose, the emergency protocols, all of it had been removed from the official records. The more I investigated, the more paranoid I became. People started staring at me. Not obviously, just lingering glances when I passed. The kind of attention that suggests you've done something wrong. But nobody is going to tell you what it is. The clerk at the grocery store seemed to recognize me now, and she watched me as I moved through the aisles, her expression unreadable and disturbing. I asked a man at the gas station about the town, his history. He told me to leave. Not politely, not as a suggestion. He looked me dead in the eyes and said I should pack my things and get out of town before the next siren. Then he turned and walked away, leaving me standing alone in the fluorescent lighting, my heart pounding with a fear I couldn't name. That night, I decided to leave. I packed my car, planning to drive out at dawn. I would lose the deposit on my apartment, but I didn't care. This town was wrong. The people were wrong. The siren was wrong. Everything about this place had become a nightmare that I needed to escape. But sleep wouldn't come. I lay in bed, listening to every sound in the building, jumping at every creak and groan of the old structure. My mind was spinning, trying to piece together what the siren meant. Was it for a disease? Some kind of contamination? A warning about something in the area? The not knowing was eating me alive, creating scenarios in my head that grew increasingly horrifying. Then, at 3 a.m, I heard something that stopped my heart completely. Screaming. It was coming from somewhere in the building, from below my apartment, or perhaps from the structure itself. A woman's voice, raw and agonized, screaming words I couldn't make out. The sound went on for 10 seconds, 15 seconds, and then it stopped abruptly, as if someone had severed her vocal cords mid-scream. I bolted from my bed and grabbed my keys. I was leaving now, immediately. I didn't care that it was 3 a.m. I didn't care that it was dark. I was getting out of this town. I ran downstairs and burst through the front door of my building into the night air. The town was silent. No cars, no lights except a few street lamps scattered along Main Street. And there, 3 blocks away, I saw movement. A figure walking down the center of the street, moving with an unnatural gait, as if its body wasn't quite aligned with gravity. I froze. The figure stopped moving. It stood there in the darkness, and even from a distance, I could feel it looking at me. Not a sensation, not intuition. I could actually feel the weight of its attention, the terrifying knowledge that something in this town had noticed me. The siren began to wail, but this time, it was different. This time, I understood that the siren wasn't a warning. It wasn't an alert about weather or danger or emergency. The siren was a call, a summons, an invitation to something that lived in this town, something that had been living here since 1952, something that only appeared when the siren sounded. Doors began to open along Main Street. People started emerging from their homes and buildings, moving with that same unnatural gait as the figure I'd seen. They shuffled toward the center of town, toward the town square. More and more of them, dozens of them, converging from all directions. I watched in absolute horror as the frightening procession moved through the streets. These were people I'd seen during the day. Normal people, the barista, the postman, the little girl who lived 3 doors down. But they weren't normal anymore. Their movements were synchronized. Their expressions were blank. Their eyes were entirely black. The siren continued its chilling wail, and I finally understood what it meant. The siren was a feeding alarm. It meant that something in this town was hungry, and the residents knew what they had to do. They had been conditioned, over generations, to respond to that sound, to stop being themselves, to become food for whatever lived beneath the town. The horrifying realization crashed over me with the force of a physical blow. I had to run. I scrambled back toward my car, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life. I threw it into reverse, pulling out of the parking spot so fast I heard the scrape of metal on asphalt. I shifted into drive and pressed the accelerator to the floor. The creepy procession of town residents was moving toward the square, but their heads were turning, following my car as it raced down Main Street. Their mouths were opening, not speaking, not screaming, just opening, wider and wider, impossibly wide, as if something inside them was trying to get out. The town limits appeared ahead of me like salvation. I crossed them at 80 miles per hour, and for a moment, I thought I was safe. I thought I had escaped. Then the siren wailed again, and in my rearview mirror, I saw them. Dozens of figures moving down the highway after me, their unnatural gaits somehow covering ground faster than any human should be able to move. They weren't in cars. They were running. and they were getting closer. I drove all night without stopping. I drove through Nebraska and into Wyoming, my hands locked on the steering wheel, my eyes wide open with terror. The siren followed me somehow, not as a sound, but as a presence in my mind. A calling, a hunger. I eventually made it to a motel in a town called Casper. They've been here for 3 months now. I haven't slept more than a few minutes at a time. Every night, I hear the siren in the distance, that low, moaning wail. And every night, I wake up to find that I've been sleepwalking. The disturbing part is that I don't remember where I go when I sleepwalk. I find myself back in my bed with no memory of how I got there. But my feet are always dirty. My shoes are always muddy. And occasionally, when I look in the mirror, my eyes are just a little bit darker than they should be. Last week, I saw the news. The small Nebraska town has been quarantined. Nobody is allowed in or out. The official explanation is a chemical spill, but I know better. The siren has been getting hungrier. It has been calling more frequently. And soon, there won't be enough people left in that town to satisfy it. The most terrifying thought I have every single day is this: what if the siren is calling me back? What if it was never supposed to let me leave? What if I am already one of them, and I just don't know it yet? Some nights, I stand at my motel window and listen to the darkness. And I swear I can hear it, far away, but getting closer. That low, methodical wail, that chilling summons, that terrifying invitation. The town siren that wasn't T for weather is still ringing in my mind, and I have a sickening feeling that no distance will ever be far enough to escape its call. Story 8. Store that stayed open too late. The store was always open when it shouldn't to be, and that's what killed my brother. I am telling you this because someone needs to know the truth about what happened in Millbrook, Mississippi, population 312. 311 now. The police called it an accident, a tragic case of wrong place, wrong time. But I was there. I saw what that place really was. And the horrifying truth is that the store is still open right now, still glowing in the darkness, still waiting for the next person desperate enough to walk through those doors after midnight. It started 6 weeks ago when I drove down to help my brother Mark move out of his rental house. He'd gotten a job offer in Atlanta, finally leaving that dying town behind. I arrived late, around 11 at night, after 8 hours on the road. The highway had been empty for the last 50 miles, nothing but darkness and pine trees pressing in from both sides. My gas light had been on for 20 minutes, that annoying orange glow reminding me of my stupidity for not filling up earlier. Every gas station I passed was closed, dark, abandoned, looking in that creepy way small-town businesses get when the economy moves on without them. Then I saw it, a small store sitting alone on the corner of Main Street and County Road 12, blazing with light like a beacon in the darkness. The sign above the door read, "Harmon, this general store," in faded red letters. Every window was lit up bright, and I could see shelves stocked with goods inside. The open sign glowed neon red. It looked so normal, so welcoming, that I didn't question why a store in a town this small would be open at 11:30 on a Tuesday night. I should have questioned it. I should have driven past and risked running out of gas. I pulled into the empty parking lot, gravel crunching under my tires. The store was old, probably built in the 50s, with white siding that had gone gray with age and a rusted metal awning over the entrance. But the lights inside were modern, fluorescent tubes that hummed loud enough to hear through the closed door. As I got out of my car, I noticed something disturbing. There were no other cars anywhere. No vehicles behind the store, no truck for deliveries. Nothing. Just my dusty sedan sitting alone in that gravel lot. The air smelled wrong. Not bad exactly, but off somehow, like the way a room smells when it's been closed up too long. The night was silent except for that electrical humming from inside. No crickets, no birds, no distant traffic sounds. Just that unsettling buzz of fluorescent lights and the creepy feeling of being watched from the surrounding darkness. I walked to the door and pulled it open. A bell chimed, cheerful and jarring in the silence. The inside of the store was cramped, with narrow aisles packed tight with merchandise. Canned goods, cleaning supplies, motor oil, candy bars, magazines. Everything you'd expect in a small-town general store, but everything looked old. Not vintage old, but wrong old. The candy bars were brands I hadn't seen since I was a kid. The magazines had celebrities on the covers who'd been dead for years. The prices on the shelves were impossibly low, like someone had forgotten to update them since 1980. Nobody was at the counter. I called out, my voice sounding too loud in the confined space. No answer, just that constant electrical humming and a sound I hadn't noticed before. A low clicking coming from somewhere in the back of the store, rhythmic and mechanical, like an old clock or something worse. I grabbed a gas can from the shelf and some snacks, then waited at the counter. The register was ancient, one of those mechanical ones with buttons that physically press down. A small handwritten sign next to it read, "Please ring bell for service." I hit the bell. The ding echoed through the store, sharp and bright. Still no response. The clicking from the back room grew louder. That's when I noticed the photographs on the wall behind the counter. Dozens of them, old Polaroids pinned up in neat rows. They showed people standing in the store, customers posing with someone who must have been the owner. But something about the photos made my skin crawl. The people in them looked wrong somehow. Their smiles too wide, their eyes too bright, their poses too stiff. And in every single photograph, in the background, you could see the same thing. The front windows showing pure darkness outside, no streetlights, no cars, just black. Every photo was taken at night. Every single one. I was backing away from the counter, fear starting to creep up my spine, when I heard footsteps. Someone was coming from the back room, slow and heavy, accompanied by that clicking sound. The footsteps got closer, steady and deliberate, and I realized the clicking was synchronized with them. Click step, click step, click step. A man emerged from the shadows of the back hallway. He was old, maybe 70, dressed in a white shirt and black pants that looked like they'd been pressed 1,000 times. His face was deeply lined, his hair white and thin, his eyes a watery blue. He smiled when he saw me, and that smile was the most disturbing thing I'd ever seen. Too wide, too many teeth, too much joy at seeing a customer at midnight. He moved behind the counter with that clicking gait, and I saw why. His left leg was some kind of prosthetic, old-fashioned metal and wood that clicked against the floor with each step. He positioned himself at the register and looked at me expectantly, still smiling that horrifying smile. I put the gas can and snacks on the counter, my hands shaking slightly. He rang them up on that ancient register, the keys clunking down with each press. The total came to $3.40. Impossibly cheap. Wrong. Everything about this was wrong. I gave him a $5 bill, and he made change from a drawer full of old coins, some of them so worn I couldn't read the dates. He handed me my change and a receipt, his fingers cold and dry when they brushed against mine. The receipt was blank except for a single line of text printed in faded ink. "Thank you for shopping at Harmon. We're always open when you need us." I grabbed my items and walked quickly toward the door, desperate to get out of that creepy place and back into the normal darkness outside. But as I reached for the handle, the old man spoke. His voice was rough, like gravel scraping against metal. He told me to be careful on the roads at night. He told me that lots of folks stopped by when they needed help. He told me the store was always there, always open, always ready to serve. And then he said something that made my blood freeze. He said my brother had been in just last week. I turned back to look at him, confused and scared. I hadn't mentioned my brother, hadn't mentioned why I was in town. The old man just smiled that terrible smile and pointed to the wall of photographs. There, in the second row, third from the left, was a Polaroid of Mark standing in this very store, holding a bottle of water and smiling stiffly at the camera. Behind him, through the windows, was that same endless darkness. I ran. I didn't say anything. Didn't ask how he knew. Didn't wait for an explanation. I just ran to my car, threw the gas can in the back seat, and drove away as fast as I could. In my rearview mirror, I could see the store blazing with light, and the old man standing in the doorway, watching me leave, still smiling. Mark, his house was dark when I arrived. I let myself in with the key he told me was under the mat, my heart still pounding from the encounter at the store. I tried to convince myself it was just a weird small-town thing, that the old man had seen Mark around town and recognized the family resemblance. But I couldn't shake the image of that photograph, couldn't forget how my brother had looked in it. That stiff, unnatural pose, those two bright eyes. I crashed on the couch and fell into an uneasy sleep filled with nightmares about clicking footsteps and fluorescent lights. Mark woke me the next morning, looking tired and worried. He said he'd been having terrible dreams lately, always the same one. He was in a store, shopping late at night, and he couldn't leave. The doors wouldn't open. The old man behind the counter kept ringing up items Mark didn't remember picking up, and the total kept growing, dollar after dollar, until the register exploded in a shower of coins and blood. I told him about stopping at Harmon's general store. His face went pale. He sat down heavily on the couch next to me and put his head in his hands. Then he told me his story, and it was so much worse than I imagined. 3 weeks ago, Mark had been driving home late from his girlfriend's place in the next town over. It was after midnight, and he'd seen the store lit up bright on that empty corner. He needed cigarettes, so he stopped. The old man had been there, smiling that horrible smile, clicking around behind the counter. Mark bought his cigarettes and left, thinking nothing of it. But the next night, he'd driven past the store again, and it was open. Lights blazing at 1 a.m. He stopped, but he noticed. And the night after that, driving home from work at 10, the store was open. Every night, no matter what time, the lights were on. The old man was there. The store was always open when it shouldn't be. Then Mark started having the dreams. And he noticed other things, disturbing things. He'd find receipts in his pockets he didn't remember getting. Small purchases, always from Harmon, always at strange hours. 3:27 a.m., 4:42 a.m., 2:16 a.m., but Mark remembered being asleep during those times. He remembered being home, in bed, definitely not shopping. The creepy part was that the items on the receipts would appear in his house. A can of soup he didn't buy sitting in his cupboard. A magazine he never purchased on his coffee table. A candy bar in his jacket pocket. All of them things the receipt said he bought from Harmon's general store. Mark was convinced he was sleepwalking, going to the store in some kind of fugue state. He started locking his bedroom door from the inside, putting his car keys in a locked box. But the receipts kept appearing. The items kept showing up. And every night, when he drove past that corner, the store was open, blazing with light. And he swore he could see the old man standing in the window, watching him drive by, smiling. I didn't know what to say. It sounded insane, like something from a nightmare or a ghost story. But I'd been to that store. I'd seen the photographs on the wall. I felt the wrongness of the place crawling under my skin. Something evil was happening in Millbrook, something that defied rational explanation. We decided to investigate. That afternoon, we drove past the store. In daylight, it looked abandoned. The windows were dark and dirty. The open sign was turned off. The door had a rusted padlock hanging from the handle. Weeds grew up through cracks in the parking lot. It looked like it had been closed for years, decades even. The sign was so faded you could barely read the name. But I'd been inside. I bought gas from that store. I had the receipt in my wallet to prove it. I pulled it out to show Mark, and the paper had changed. Instead of the printed text I'd seen last night, the receipt was now covered in handwritten words, scrawled over and over in faded ink. Come back. We were always open. Come back. The fear I felt was nothing compared to the terror that gripped me then. This wasn't just creepy or unsettling. This was something darker, something that bent reality itself. We were dealing with something that shouldn't exist, something that operated by rules we didn't understand. Mark wanted to leave town immediately, to pack up and drive away and never look back. But I convinced him to wait until morning. One more night, then we leave at dawn. We spent the evening packing, loading boxes into his truck, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread that seemed to thicken the air around us. At 11:45, the power went out. The whole house plunged into darkness, sudden and complete. We used our phones for light, checking the breaker box, but everything looked fine. Through the windows, we could see the rest of the neighborhood was dark too. A blackout, probably a blown transformer somewhere. Then Mark noticed the glow outside, faint at first, but growing brighter. We went to the front window and looked toward Main Street, 2 blocks away. The store was lit up like a stadium, every light blazing, visible even from this distance. The only source of light in the entire darkened town, and as we watched, other lights began turning on throughout Millbrook. Not house lights or street lights. Windows. Windows in homes that should have been dark, lighting up one by one, spreading out from the store like a wave. But the light in those windows was wrong, too bright, too cold, the same fluorescent quality as the lights in Harmon is. Mark, his phone rang. The sound made us both jump. He looked at the screen, and his face went white. The caller ID said, "Harmon, it's General Store." He didn't answer. The ringing stopped. Immediately, my phone rang. Same caller ID. I let it go to voicemail. The ringing stopped, and we heard it start again from somewhere in the house. Mark, his landline, still connected but unused for months. We followed the sound to the kitchen, where the old wall-mounted phone was ringing insistently. Mark grabbed it and ripped it out of the wall. The ringing stopped. In the silence that followed, we heard something that made my heart stop. A bell chiming, the same bright, cheerful bell I had heard when I entered the store. It was coming from outside, from the direction of Main Street, and it was getting closer. We locked the doors and windows, turned off our phones, and huddled in the living room with the curtains closed. Outside, we could hear footsteps on the sidewalk, that distinctive click step, moving up the street, checking each house, accompanied by the periodic chiming of that bell. It reached Mark's house and stopped outside. We held our breath, not daring to move. The doorknob rattled. A knock, polite and patient. 3 soft raps, then a voice, that gravelly voice from the store, calling through the door. It said Mark had forgotten his items. It said he placed an order and it was ready for pickup. It said the store was always open and always ready to serve its loyal customers. The voice went on for 10 minutes, calm and pleasant, explaining how much Mark owed for all his purchases, listing items we had never heard of, giving dates and times for transactions that couldn't have happened. The total kept growing, dollar after dollar, exactly like in Mark's nightmare. When it reached $999.99, the voice stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the speaking. Then the knocking started again. Not polite anymore. Loud, insistent, angry. The door shook with each impact. Something was trying to get in. And that something was strong. We ran to the back door, planning to escape to the car. But through the window we could see other figures in the yard. Dark shapes moving in the fluorescent glow that spilled from the lit windows of neighboring houses. People, or things shaped like people, standing motionless, watching the house. We were trapped. The front door was splintering. Mark grabbed a baseball bat from the closet. I found a kitchen knife. We weren't fighters, just 2 terrified men facing something we couldn't understand. The door finally gave way with a crack of breaking wood. The old man stood in the doorway, illuminated by the unnatural light outside. But he looked different now. His smile was even wider, stretching his face in ways that shouldn't be possible. His eyes glowed with that same cold fluorescent light, and his clicking prosthetic leg had changed, revealing itself as something that was never really a prosthetic at all. It was part of him, a twisted appendage of metal and bone that had grown from his flesh, clicking and whirring with each movement. He held out a receipt, the paper seeming to glow in his hand. He told us the bill was due. He told us every customer had to pay eventually. He told us the store had been feeding off this town for 70 years, that it chose its customers carefully, that once you shop there after dark you belong to it forever. Mark swung the bat. It passed right through the old man like he was made of smoke. The old man, his smile grew impossibly wider. He stepped into the house, that terrible clicking echoing through the rooms, and the figures outside began moving toward the open door. I grabbed Mark and pulled him toward the garage. We scrambled into his truck, and he gunned the engine, smashing through the closed garage door. The figures scattered as we burst out into the street. Mark drove like a madman, speeding through the darkened town, running stop signs, desperate to reach the highway. But every street we turned down led back to Main Street, back to the store. It was impossible. The roads were looping, bending reality to force us back. And each time we passed the store, it was brighter, larger, more real than the rest of the fading town around it. We could see inside now, see the aisles stretching back impossibly far, see thousands of photographs on the walls, see the old man standing at the counter, watching us, waiting. Finally, Mark saw it, a gap in the nightmare, a road that led away from the pattern. He took it at 60 miles an hour, the truck fishtailing on loose gravel. Behind us, the lights of the town blazed brighter, angry at our escape. But the glow began to fade as we gained distance, and finally, we burst onto the highway, back into normal reality, back into a world that made sense. We drove for 3 hours straight, not stopping, not looking back, until we reached Jackson and the safety of city lights and crowds. Mark never went back to Millbrook. He abandoned his house, his belongings, everything. He said the job in Atlanta wasn't worth dying for. But 2 weeks later, Mark started having the dreams again. And he found a receipt in his jacket pocket, dated from the night we escaped, listing items he never purchased, with a total of $999.99. At the bottom, in handwritten text, payment overdue, return to settle account. Last week, Mark drove back to Millbrook. He left me a voicemail saying he had to face it, had to end it somehow, had to pay what he owed or it would never stop haunting him. I tried to stop him, begged him to stay away, but he was determined. He said he'd call me when it was over. He never called. The police found his truck 3 days later, parked in that gravel lot in front of Harmon's General Store. The store was abandoned, they said, had been closed since the original owner died in 1992. But they found Mark's body inside, slumped behind the counter where the old man used to stand. The coroner ruled it a heart attack, natural causes. But I know better. I know because I got a package yesterday. Inside was a Polaroid photograph showing Mark standing in that store, holding items I'd done to recognize. Smiling that too wide smile, his eyes glowing with fluorescent light. Behind him, through the windows, that endless darkness. And pinned to the back of the photo was a receipt with my name on it, listing a purchase I made 6 weeks ago. 1 gas can, 2 candy bars, total $3.40. At the bottom, in that same handwritten scrawl, thank you for shopping at Harmon's. We're always open when you need you. The terrifying thing is, I started seeing it. Driving at night, through small towns, on empty highways, I see stores that shouldn't to be open. Lights blazing after midnight in places that should be dark. And I know that one night, when desperate enough, tired enough, scared enough, I'll stop. I'll walk through those doors. I'll hear that cheerful bell chime. And I'll never leave. The store is still there in Millbrook. Still waiting. Still open when it shouldn't. TB. And somewhere in America tonight, in another dying town on another empty highway, another store is lighting up in the darkness, calling to another desperate traveler. If you see it, keep driving. No matter how much you need what's inside, no matter how welcoming those lights look, just keep driving. Because once you shop there, once you become a customer, you belong to it forever. And eventually, one way or another, you will have to pay what you owe. The store is always open. And it's always hungry. Story 9. Heat that wouldn't tea break. I should have left Stillwater the day the thermometers stopped working. That was 3 weeks into the heat, when every digital display in town started showing the same number, 113 degrees. Always. Morning, noon, midnight. The number never changed, even though we all knew it was getting hotter. This is a true story about what happened in my hometown during the summer of last year, and I need you to understand something before I continue. What I witnessed was not a natural phenomenon. The heat that settled over Stillwater, Arizona, was not weather. It was something else entirely, something that fed on us. My name is Marcus Webb, and I spent 42 years thinking I understood how the world worked. I was a maintenance supervisor at the old Pinnacle copper mine on the edge of town. Steady job, quiet life, nothing remarkable. The kind of existence where your biggest concern is whether your truck will make it another year. That version of reality ended when the heat arrived. It started in late May, unseasonably early even for Arizona. The temperature climbed to 105, then stayed there. Day after day. No relief when the sun went down. The desert night, usually cool enough for a jacket, remained thick and suffocating. Within a week, the local news stopped calling it a heat wave. They had no explanation for why the temperature refused to drop, why no weather system could move through our valley. The first strange thing I noticed was the silence. Stillwater had always been alive with the sound of insects at night, the distant howl of coyotes, the flutter of bats hunting mosquitoes. All of that stopped. The desert went quiet, as if every living creature had fled or died. I would stand on my porch at 2 in the morning, unable to sleep in the stifling heat, and hear absolutely nothing. Not even wind. The air itself seemed to have died. People started changing around day 10. Nothing obvious at first, just small shifts in behavior. My neighbor, Rita, who had lived next door for 15 years and always waved when she saw me, stopped making eye contact. She would stand in her front yard at odd hours, staring at her house like she had never seen it before. When I asked if she was okay, she looked through me with eyes that seemed unfocused, distant. She said she was fine, but her voice sounded flat, mechanical. The grocery store became a disturbing place. I needed water, batteries, anything to help cope with the relentless heat. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed louder than usual, and the air conditioning had given up days ago. Other shoppers moved through the aisles in slow motion, their movements oddly synchronized. 3 people turned down the canned goods aisle at exactly the same moment. 2 elderly men reached for the same product simultaneously, their hands moving in perfect unison. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the squeaking of cartwheels and that incessant buzzing from the lights overhead. I grabbed what I needed and left quickly, my skin crawling with unease. By week 2, the exodus began. Smart people packed their cars and drove out of town, heading for anywhere cooler. But a disturbing number of residents stayed. They claimed they felt fine, that the heat did not bother them. Their faces were flushed, skin taking on a reddish tint that looked almost sunburned, but they insisted everything was normal. Some even said they liked it, that the warmth felt good, cleansing. I tried to leave on day 16, loaded my truck with supplies, filled the gas tank, and headed north on Highway 77 toward Globe. The road shimmered with heat mirages, nothing unusual for Arizona. But after 30 minutes of driving, I realized something was wrong. Terribly wrong. Every landmark I passed again. The same crooked Joshua tree. The same abandoned gas station with the faded Texaco sign. The same mile marker, 143. I was driving in a circle, but the road ahead looked perfectly straight. Panic set in. I turned around, tried heading south instead. Same result. After an hour of driving in both directions, always ending up at the same points, I returned to Stillwater. The town had become a trap, an invisible boundary that refused to let anyone leave. That night, I called my sister in Phoenix. The phone rang, but when she answered, all I heard was static and beneath it, something else. A sound like breathing, slow and rhythmic, but too deep to be human. I hung up and did not try to call anyone again. The people who had stayed were now acting openly strange. I watched from my window as groups of them gathered in the street at midnight, standing in perfect circles, silent and motionless. Their faces all turned upward toward the dark sky, expressions blank. They would stand like that for hours, not moving, barely breathing. When dawn came, they would disperse and return to their homes without a word. The heat continued to intensify. My thermometer might have been frozen at 113, but my body knew the truth. The air felt thick enough to chew. Breathing became difficult, like inhaling hot soup. My skin constantly felt tight, dry, on the verge of splitting. I drank water constantly, but never felt relief. The heat was inside me now, radiating from my core. Something was living in the heat. I am certain of that now. Something vast and incomprehensible that used the temperature as a medium, the way fish use water. I began seeing it in my peripheral vision, shapes that moved through the shimmering air. Dark forms that appeared human-sized but moved wrong, their movements jerky and insect-like. Whenever I tried to look directly at them, they vanished. The shadows started appearing everywhere. Not normal shadows cast by objects blocking light, but autonomous patches of darkness that existed independently. They would slide along walls, pool in corners, stretch across floors without any source. I watched one creep across my living room ceiling, moving against the direction of the sunlight, defying every natural law. It paused above me, and I swear I felt it watching, considering, deciding whether I was ready yet. Ready for what? I did not know. I did not want to know. On day 21, I found the source. Or rather, it found me. I had been searching the old mine, thinking perhaps the answer lay underground where it was cooler. The shaft descended 300 feet into the earth, and I expected relief from the oppressive heat. Instead, it grew hotter with every step down. The walls radiated warmth, the metal ladder almost too hot to touch even through my gloves. At the bottom, I found them. 30 or 40 townspeople, maybe more, all standing in the main chamber. They faced the far wall where something glowed with a pulsing orange light. Not fire, something else. The rock itself seemed to be breathing, expanding and contracting in a slow, steady rhythm. With each pulse, A wave of intense heat washed over me, so powerful it nearly knocked me down. The people stood transfixed, their skin now bright red, almost glowing themselves. Their eyes reflected that orange light, and when one of them turned to look at me, I saw nothing human left inside. Just hunger, not for food or water, but for heat itself. They had become addicts, junkies for the temperature that was killing them. And they wanted to share their salvation. I ran, scrambled back up that ladder faster than I thought possible for a man my age. Behind me, I could hear them following, moving with unsettling speed. Their footsteps did not sound right, too many impacts, as if they were no longer walking on two legs. I made it to the surface and kept running, across the desert scrub, toward the edge of town. The boundary that had trapped me before. As I approached, I could see it now, a faint shimmer in the air like a heat mirage, but vertical, stretching up into the sky as far as I could see. A wall of pure temperature, sealing us in. Behind me, the changed townspeople emerged from the mine entrance, at least 100 of them now, all moving together like a single organism. Their mouths hung open, and that same orange glow emanated from their throats. They were not chasing me to hurt me. They wanted to show me something, to bring me into the heat, to make me understand what they had learned in that chamber deep below the earth. I did the only thing I could think of. I drove my truck straight at the barrier, did not slow down, did not think, just floored the accelerator. The speedometer hit 85 when I struck that wall of heat. For a moment, everything went white. The temperature spiked so high I thought I would combust. The paint on my hood bubbled and peeled. The windshield cracked in a spiderweb pattern. Then I was through. On the other side, the air was cool. Actually cool. I could breathe again. Behind me, Stillwater shimmered behind that invisible barrier. A town locked in an eternal heat that had become something alive and hungry. I drove for 6 hours straight before I stopped shaking enough to pull over. Eventually made it to Flagstaff, where I tried to tell authorities what had happened. They sent a state trooper to investigate. He never came back. They sent 2 more. Same result. After the 3rd disappearance, they quietly cordoned off the area and stopped talking about it publicly. That was 8 months ago. I have been living in a motel ever since, afraid to stay anywhere too long, afraid the heat might find me again. Because I can still feel it sometimes, especially on hot days. A warmth that seems to come from nowhere, settling into my bones, whispering that I should go back. That I left before understanding the beautiful thing they had discovered down in the mine. That the heat was not torture but transcendence. I check my truck, its thermometer obsessively now. As long as it shows different temperatures, changing numbers, I know I am safe. But 3 days ago, I looked down and saw it frozen at 113. I watched it for an hour. It never changed. I immediately drove to a different town, bought a new vehicle with cash, kept moving. Because I know what it means when the temperature stops changing. It means the heat has found you. It means something has decided you are ready to understand. And once you understand, once you feel that warmth deep in your core and recognize it for what it truly is, you will never want to leave it again. I am writing this in a library in Durango, Colorado. It is February. There is snow on the ground outside. But I am sweating. My skin feels tight and hot. The thermometer on my phone says it is 32 degrees, but I do not believe it anymore. I can feel the truth. The heat is here. It followed me. It has been following me all along, patient and inevitable. And the most terrifying part, I am starting to think it feels good. This warmth spreading through me, radiating out from somewhere deep inside. Maybe the people of Stillwater were not victims. Maybe they discovered something the rest of us are too frightened to accept. Maybe the heat is not something to run from. My hands are shaking as I type this. Not from fear, from anticipation, because I can see them now. Other people in this library, and some of them are glowing faintly with that same orange light. They are watching me, waiting, and I am beginning to understand why. The heat never breaks. It only spreads. Story 10. Story no one told outsiders. They warned me not to ask about the missing year, but I should have listened when the locals went silent. I moved to Coopersville, Oregon 6 months ago for work, a quiet logging town tucked into the Cascade foothills where everyone knows everyone and strangers are noticed immediately. The kind of place where people wave from their porches and the diner serves the same menu it has had since the 70s. It seemed perfect, safe, exactly what I needed after the chaos of city life. But there was something disturbing underneath that small town charm, something the locals kept hidden behind their friendly smiles and casual conversations. I first noticed it at the hardware store. I was buying supplies to fix my deck when I mentioned I was researching the town's history for an article one wanted to write. The owner, a man named Dale, who had been nothing but talkative every other time I visited, went completely silent. His smile faded. He rang up my purchase without another word, and when I asked if there were any interesting stories about Coopersville this past, he just shook his head and told me to have a nice day. The creepy thing was how fast his demeanor changed, like I had crossed some invisible line. That night, I started digging through old newspapers at the library. Coopersville had a typical small-town history. Founded in 1892, built around timber, survived the Depression, prospered in the post-war boom. But as I scrolled through the archives, I found something terrifying and inexplicable. The year 1973 was completely missing. Not a single newspaper from that entire year. The archive jumped from December 31st, 1972 directly to January 2nd, 1974. 365 days just gone, erased like they never happened. I asked the librarian, an elderly woman named Mrs. Hendricks, about the gap. She looked at me with eyes that held something between fear and warning, then told me those papers must have been lost or damaged. But her hands shook as she said it, and she quickly excused herself, disappearing into the back room and not returning before closing time. The fear in her reaction was obvious, unsettling, and it made my curiosity grow into an obsession. Over the next few weeks, I tried to learn what happened in that missing year. I asked neighbors, co-workers, anyone who lived in Coopersville long enough to remember. Every single person gave me the same response: immediate silence, a change in expression from friendly to guarded, then excuses to end the conversation. Some claimed they didn't remember. Others said nothing interesting happened. A few simply walked away without explanation. The consistency of their reactions was chilling, like they'd all been trained to respond the same way. But the most disturbing thing was the demographics. I started noticing that almost no one in Coopersville was between the ages of 50 and 52. There should have been hundreds of people born in 1973, but I could only find a handful, and all of them had moved to town after that year. It was like an entire generation had been erased from this place, and nobody would acknowledge the absence. I became obsessed. I spent my evenings driving around town, looking for clues, anything that might explain the mystery. That is when I noticed the memorial in the woods north of town. It was hidden off an old logging road, overgrown with moss and ferns, a simple stone marker with no names, just a date, 1973. Someone had left flowers there recently, fresh daisies that stood out against the gray stone. The memorial was eerie in its simplicity, haunting in what it didn't say. I took photos and returned to town, determined to find answers. At the diner that evening, I showed the photos to my usual waitress, a woman in her 60s named Carol. She went pale when she saw the screen. Her hands trembled as she set down my coffee, and she leaned in close, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. She told me to stop asking questions. She told me some stories weren't meant for outsiders. She told me the people who lived through that year made a choice to forget, and I needed to respect that choice. But I couldn't stop. The fear in her voice, the terror in her eyes, only made the mystery more compelling. That night, I decided to break into the town hall basement, where older records were stored. I waited until midnight, picked a simple lock on the back door, and descended into the musty darkness below the main offices. The basement was packed with filing cabinets and boxes, decades of town records covered in dust. I searched for hours with only my phone, this flashlight, growing more frustrated as I found nothing. Then, behind a shelf in the far corner, I discovered a metal door I missed. It was locked with a heavy padlock, and a handwritten sign warned, "Authorized personnel only, town council approval required." I broke the lock with a crowbar I brought. The door swung open with a horror movie creak, revealing a small room lined with boxes, all labeled with a single year, 1973. My heart pounded as I opened the first box. Inside were newspapers, the missing editions, carefully preserved and hidden away. The headlines made my blood run cold. Seventh child missing. Search continues. Town meeting called as fear grows. State police investigation finds no leads. Another disappearance. Parents pled for answers. I sat on the concrete floor and read through the papers, and the story that emerged was absolutely terrifying. In January of 1973, children started disappearing from Coopersville. Not kidnapped in the traditional sense. They would simply vanish from their beds at night, leaving no trace, no signs of forced entry, no witnesses. The first was a 6-year-old boy named Tommy Fletcher. Then a week later, an 8-year-old girl named Sarah Chen. Then another, and another, until by March, 11 children had vanished into thin air. The town descended into paranoia. Parents stopped sleeping, keeping watch over their children through the night. People installed new locks, got dogs, formed neighborhood watches. But the disappearances continued. The state police investigated but found nothing. No bodies, no evidence, no suspects. It was like the children had simply ceased to exist. Then I found the article that explained everything, dated June 15, 1973. The headline read, "Town Council announces special session, mandatory attendance required." According to the article, every adult in Coopersville was ordered to attend an emergency meeting at the high school gymnasium. What happened at that meeting wasn't in the newspaper, but there was a handwritten note paper clipped to the article. The note was brief, terrifying in its simplicity. "We made a choice. God forgive us." The next newspaper was dated July 1st. The disappearances had stopped, but so had everything else. The papers from July through December were eerily normal, filled with mundane stories about town fairs and high school sports, as if the horror of the previous 6 months had never happened. There were no follow-up articles about the missing children, no memorials, no mention of the investigation, just silence, calculated and complete. I found something else in that hidden room that made everything worse. Photographs, hundreds of them, taken at that town meeting. They showed the entire adult population of Coopersville packed into the gymnasium, their faces pale and terrified. And at the front of the room, standing at a podium, was a figure that didn't look quite human. Tall and thin, wearing a dark suit, but with proportions that were subtly wrong. The face was blurred in every photo, like the camera couldn't quite capture it, but you could see the crowd, its reactions, horror, despair, and something else. Acceptance. The last item in the boxes was a leather journal, unmarked and filled with handwritten entries. I opened it with shaking hands and began to read. It was written by the town, its mayor at the time, a man named Robert Harding, and it detailed something so disturbing that I still have nightmares about it. According to the journal, the figure at the meeting had introduced itself as the collector. It claimed to have been drawn to Coopersville by something the town had done decades earlier, some forgotten crime that had marked the entire community. As payment for this transgression, it wanted children. 11 had been taken as samples, demonstrations of power, but the collector offered the town a choice. It could take all the children, every single one under the age of 15, leaving Coopersville childless forever. Or the town could make a sacrifice, a terrible bargain that would satisfy the debt. The adults of Coopersville chose the bargain. They agreed to give up something precious in exchange for their children's lives. But it wasn't the money or possessions the collector wanted. It wanted their memories. Every adult in that gymnasium agreed to forget that year, to have 1973 erased from their minds completely. The 11 children who had been taken would stay gone, their absence explained away as moves to other towns, normal departures that wouldn't raise suspicion. And in exchange, no more children would disappear. But the price was higher than simple forgetting. The collector took something else too. It took their ability to have children. Every adult who made that bargain became sterile, unable to have more kids. The children who survived that year grew up as the last generation born in Coopersville. And when they had their own children, those kids were born somewhere else, raised somewhere else, never told the truth about their hometown. The journal's final entry was dated December 31st, 1973. Mayor Harding wrote that the agreement had been kept. The newspapers from that year had been collected and hidden. The parents of the missing children had been given false memories of their kids moving away. And tomorrow, when the calendar turned to 1974, the entire town would wake up with a year-shaped hole in their memories, knowing something was missing but unable to remember what. He ended with a warning. The collector would return if anyone tried to break the agreement, if anyone tried to tell the story to outsiders, if anyone tried to remember. The town had been marked, cursed, bound to this entity forever. And the only way to keep their remaining children safe was through silence. I sat in that hidden room for hours, processing the horrifying truth. This quiet logging town had made a deal with something evil, something beyond human understanding. and everyone who lived through it was still trapped by that bargain. The silence when I asked questions wasn't just secrecy. It was survival. I took photos of everything and left the basement just before dawn. But as I drove home through the empty streets, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. People were watching me from their windows. Dozens of faces, barely visible in the pre-dawn darkness, tracking my car as I passed. They knew what I found. They knew I had broken into the hidden room. And they were afraid of what I might do with that knowledge. When I reached my house, there was a note taped to my front door. Simple, handwritten, unsigned. Leave Coopersville by tomorrow night. Don, to tell anyone what you found. This is your only warning. I should have left immediately. I should have thrown everything in my car and driven away without looking back. But I was angry. These people had covered up the disappearance of 11 children. They made a deal with something monstrous and then pretended it never happened. They deserved to have their story told. I spent the next day writing everything down, uploading my photos to cloud storage, preparing to expose the truth. As evening fell, I heard vehicles pulling up outside my house. Through the window, I saw the entire town council standing on my lawn. Maybe 20 people, all wearing the same expression of grim determination. The mayor, a woman named Elizabeth Warren, knocked on my door. I didn't open it. She spoke through the wood, her voice calm but underlaid with fear. She told me I didn't understand what I was interfering with. She told me the bargain protected more than just their children. It protected the entire world from the collector's attention. If the story got out, if outsiders started investigating, asking questions, disturbing the agreement, the collector would return. And this time, it wouldn't just take children from Coopersville. She told me about other towns where the silence had been broken. Places where curious outsiders had uncovered similar secrets and tried to expose them. Those towns didn't exist anymore. Not destroyed physically, but erased. Removed from maps, wiped from records, forgotten by everyone except the few survivors who carried the terrifying memories. She gave me until midnight to make my choice. Delete everything I found and leave town forever, or refuse and face whatever consequences came. The implied threat was clear. They would do whatever it took to protect their secret, even if it meant making sure I couldn't tell anyone. I sat in my house as the hours counted down, weighing my options. The journalist in me wanted to expose the truth, to give voice to those 11 missing children, to punish the town for their cowardice. But the human in me was terrified. These people had lived with this horror for 50 years. They sacrificed their ability to have children, their memories, their peace of mind, all to protect the kids they had left. Who was I to condemn them for that choice? At 11:30, I made my decision. I deleted the photos. I burned my notes. I erased everything I'd written. And at midnight exactly, I drove out of Coopersville with everything I owned packed into my car. But I kept the journal. I know I shouldn't have, but I couldn't let those 11 children be completely forgotten. Tommy Fletcher, Sarah Chen, and 9 others whose names were written in those pages. They deserve to be remembered by someone, even if that someone was an outsider who had never known them. I am telling this story now from 3 states away, living under a different name, always looking over my shoulder. Because I started noticing things. Shadows that moved wrong, figures in the distance that watched too long, and twice now, I've woken up to find notes on my door. We were watching. Keep the silence. The terrifying truth is that the story isn't over. Whatever the collector is, whatever bargain was made in 1973, it is still active. And Coopersville isn't the only town that made a deal. There are others, scattered across America, communities bound by secrets they can never share, living under agreements they can never break. If you ever find yourself in a small town that feels too quiet, where everyone seems to share an unspoken understanding, where certain topics make people go silent, don't dig deeper. Some stories aren't meant for outsiders. Some secrets exist for reasons we can comprehend. And some bargains, once made, can never be undone. The collector is still out there, still watching, still waiting for someone to break the silence. And every time an outsider asks the wrong questions, every time someone threatens to expose the truth, it pays attention. I broke the silence. I am telling you this story now, and I know what that means. The collector knows where I am. It is only a matter of time before it comes for payment. If you Re-listening to this and something happens to me. If I disappear like those 11 children disappeared. Dawn, to investigate. Dawn, to ask questions. Dawn, to try to find out what happened. Just remember that some horrors are kept secret not because people are evil, but because the alternative is so much worse. The story no one told outsiders wasn't just a local legend. It was a warning, and I ignored it. Now I'm living with the consequences, counting down the days until the collector comes to collect what I owe for breaking the bargain. And when it does, when I vanish like Tommy Fletcher and Sarah Chan vanished, Coopersville will continue on in silence, keeping their terrible secret, protecting their children from a horror that never really went away. It just learned to hide better.